Okay. And now it's not working again.
Bye, James.
Bye. No, that's okay. Okay, everybody, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This whole, well, maybe. I thought we were going to start, but it's just like broken for some reason. That's not good. Try this. Okay. We're gonna hope that works. Okay, so everybody, welcome to Let's Build a Website. This is the third in our HackKU Beginners workshop series, and I'm going to teach you all about web development. So, really? Wow. That's annoying. Maybe, okay. We're going to hope that there's no more problems with that. So, we're going to learn all about websites. And the first question to ask yourself is, how does a website, how does it actually work? Maybe? Can I use yours? Yeah. Okay, so moving on. So how does a website actually work? You type in like Amazon.com on your web browser and you get displayed a page, but like, what does that mean? How does that even happen? We're gonna break down the whole process. So sort of for what we're doing, there's three main ingredients we're gonna need, and that's HTML, CSS, and Flask. And you put those things all together in a pot and you can make a wonderful website just like Amazon.com, which still seems weird, only three things and you can create something on the web? Well, yes, you can. So the first thing we need to think about is when you open a website, you open up a web browser, but what does a web browser actually do? What is the purpose of that program? It takes a HTML file and it displays it as a web page. But what is HTML? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it looks like this is in the way, so maybe I'll try to move it. I think I can minimize it, yeah. Hypertext Markup Language, which sounds foreign, but it's quite simple. The first word is hypertext, and that just stands for, it just means like text and hyperlinks put together. So whenever you click on those like blue parts of the web page, they take you to different spots, that's a hyperlink, and put them together and you get hypertext. For the markup language portion, a markup language is just simply a language that specifies the structure of some document. You all probably have taken 168 or are taking 168 now. And with Python, you're kind of telling the computer what to do with instructions. But with a markup language, you're simply telling it what to display. What should this thing actually look like? So HTML is not the only markup language. If you've used LaTeX, XML, org mode, markdown, those are all also examples of markup languages. Maybe. There we go. So in terms of the actual structure of an HTML document, it uses these things called tags. Every element in HTML starts with one of these opening tags. You put all the content in that will go in that element, and it ends with one of these closing tags over here. Put them all together and you get an HTML element. So let's see some examples of what this actually looks like. So I will open up a terminal here. Let me make it a bit bigger. We'll start with hello HTML. We should probably rename that. Hello, cd hello HTML. And then we can open a hello.html file. So kind of the root of an HTML document is these well, the first thing you need to put is up at the top. Can everybody see this? Okay, is it big enough or? Okay, excellent. So you're going to start it with this doc type HTML at the top. And what this does is basically tell the web browser when it's reading this file that it should interpret it as an HTML file. After that, we'll actually put some tags. And the one that you will start every HTML web page with, and that everything will be sort of encased in HTML, is the tag that is appropriately named HTML. After that, we're going to specify the body of our web page. So we'll use this tag called body. And then we can sort of fill this with all sorts of different elements. So a basic one is a paragraph. We'll use the P tag for paragraph. And we can put some text in here like, I don't know, hello world. That seems appropriate, right? We're good computer scientists. And then if we want to actually open this web page up and see what it does, you can open your favorite web browser. I'm going to move it over to a better spot for us. And you can type in the search bar file : / or 2 slashes, and then you can give it basically the path to your HTML file. So if we do, we can go, I'm gonna just cheat a little bit. We can go to my directory. I have a talks. I have this let's build a website. And then within it, we have the hello HTML folder. And within that, we have the hello HTML.html. And if we open that up, oh, that's the wrong one. We're not ready for that one yet. Second. Aha. This is the one we want. We can open this one up, and this is the one we made. This has just hello world. And you'll notice there's not any of the HTML or body junk, anything like that. That's because the web browser knows how to read that file, and it's telling it to display it exactly like this. And a fun thing you can do, and you might have done this when like messing around in elementary school or middle school, is you can inspect the web page and actually see the HTML that makes it up. So if you've ever gone on like Kahoot or something when you're bored in class and like changed what everything says, you might recognize this. So we maybe want to say something more interesting than hello world. Maybe we want to give our web page a header. And to do that, oh, no, I messed it up. 1 second. Okay. Maybe. Oh. Like Zoom thing is in the way. There we go. Let's drag this over here. Sorry, just getting the flow down. So if we want to make our website maybe say something more interesting, maybe we want a header on our web page, we can use this h1 tag to do that. We can say, hello, everybody. Welcome. And if you type it like that, we can even add like an emoji or something, maybe wave, if I can spell properly. We do this, and then we go back and reload our web page. You can see now we have this big header at the top of it. Some other interesting things you can do is within your paragraph, you can have bold text. We're using the strong tag. So we can say like, this is bold. You can have italic text using the EM tag. This is italic. And then we can look and see that indeed we have bold text and we have italic text, and the browser knows to display them as such. So what other things do we want to talk about here? What are other interesting HTML elements? What? Yeah, you can do underlines, you can do U. Cool. I'm going to talk about spans just a little bit later. So with that, you can kind of see some different things. A thing that's worth noting is within a paragraph tag, HTML will ignore line breaks. So let's say I wanted to maybe put some text like halfway down the page. If I put a bunch of new lines down here and I'm like, oh, hey, this is lower. And then we look at the page, it doesn't actually do that. So the spacing within your paragraphs don't matter. HTML is just all about the actual structure of what's going on. We'll get to sort of the like how you actually make things look pretty later on. So with that's kind of what HTML looks like, and there's like a whole host of different tags you can use. I'm not going to sit up here and exhaustively go over all of them, but Some other interesting things is that tags can have attributes. So in the starting tag here, you can give it some attribute equals and then in quotes the value. And this is most useful when you want to do links, right? This is hypertext. We need to have hyperlinks as part of this. So if we want to put a link in our page, this is kind of silly, but you use a tag called A. And then with A, if you want to actually give it the target of your link, you'll use this element called href. It stands for hyper reference. It's just sort of like, the reference to where the link is supposed to go. And what's a good place we can link? Well, I can only think of one place to link, hackku.org. So we'll put in there, https:// hackku.org. And then inside the tag is what you actually put like the name of the link. So like, check. Oh, I didn't close my quotes. So you can say like, check out my hackathon. Whee! Yay. So we can do this. Reload our web page. And if we click it, it takes us to HackKU. But in addition to linking to external pages, you probably want to link to internal pages as well. So let's get a terminal up here. So we can make another file called, we can call it like, I don't know, ice cream.html. And then if we want to edit it, just like every other HTML document, we can make another one. We start it with the doc type. Then we've got, HTML, of course. Can anyone tell me what goes next? What would come next? Body? Yes, correct. So body. And then within this, maybe we can put like, we can put another header, but we'll do an H2. So I showed you H1. You can go all the way through to, I think, H4, and they'll just keep getting smaller, H5 or 6, and they'll keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So actually, let's look at like, I don't know, H4. You can do like favorite ice cream flavors. I can't spell again. Favorite ice creams. H4. And then within this, we can maybe make a list of people's favorite ice cream flavors. And the way you would do lists in HTML is you can do UL standing for unordered list. And then this will make a bulleted list. And for each bullet point, you'll want to use one of these LI tags, which is a list item. So who has a favorite ice cream they want to share? Deli, what's up? Chocolate, nice, good choice. Oh. Choco. All right, chocolate marshmallow, okay. What?
From Brahms.
Specifically from Brahms? All right. All right, does anyone else? One more. Yeah. Moose tracks? What is moose tracks?
It's like watch.
All right, cool. That sounds actually really good. So the whole point we made this other web page is so that we can link to it. And the way we do that is if we want to link to another page, and maybe not a remote page, but something local to us, is we use the A tag again. But instead of putting in here the URL with HTTPS, we put the path to the other HTML file we want. So in our case, it's in our same directory. It's just called icecream.html. So we will put icecream.html. And then, I don't know, we can change, how many is that? That's like 4 words? No, almost. Check out our favorite ice creams. All right, and then if all went well, we can reload the page. We see there's a new link to the favorite ice creams. We click it and it takes us to our other page. So now you sort of can build this like web of different pages for your website. That's actually, I think, why they call it the web, because all the documents together kind of form a web. So moving on to the next component of my unorganized desktops. Another interesting thing about HTML is some of them are special, they're not like the other girls, and they don't require end tags. You can just do it with a single block. And these are called void tags. And the thing that's special about them is you just write sort of the tag name, and instead of it closing, you just put a slash right before the ending bracket. So some interesting closing tags we can talk about that are useful are, we talked earlier, we don't have line breaks. We want line breaks, right? That's like kind of important sometimes. So you can use this tag called BR, and it's a void tag, so we don't even have to close it. So it's sort of like inserting a line break into the document. And if we look, oh, I'm on the ice cream page. Now we have a line break. The other kind of interesting and important void tag is images. You can do this with the imig tag, and it has two important attributes. The first one is going to be source, or src, and the other one is alt. And then it's a void tag, so we don't have to close it. And for alt, this is just basically the text is if the browser for some reason cannot render your image. So if it has some problem, it will display the alternative text instead. So what should we put a picture of on our web page? Does anyone have any suggestions? A dog. All right, we got a dog. Cool. And then we can go find like a dog picture. This one's pretty cute. So with images, it works the same as links. You can either give it a link to an image file that's somewhere else, or you can link it to an image file locally. So if we want to do that, we can just, oh, maybe it didn't copy the link. That's annoying. Copy image address. That's what I want. Then we put it in there. Cool. And now we load it here. The dog is on our web page. It's really big, and there's also height and width elements attributes you can add to the image tag, but I'm not going to go into those for the sake of brevity. It works basically the same as all the other attributes. So now we've kind of talked about how do we actually like mark up a web page, how do we define the structure, but you know, when you're like interacting with websites, you're not going and pulling up like physical files on your computer, right? You're going to a site, it's somewhere else and you're accessing it. So how does that actually work? Well, we need to talk about something called a web server. A web server can refer to multiple things. It's kind of an ambiguous term. There's the hardware web server, which is literally just a computer that is hosting web pages, just sitting in a data center somewhere or something like this. But in software, a web server is a program that delivers files via HTTP. For us, these are going to be HTML files. But there's another acronym we don't know. What is HTTP? It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. We talked about what hypertext was earlier. Transfer is just how we transfer these files. And a protocol is basically an agreed upon way of doing things. So if you've heard of like IP addresses, it stands for Internet Protocol. And that's sort of a protocol used by the internet for computers to communicate with each other. They've all agreed on how they're going to communicate so they can talk. The same with us in transferring hypertext. Everybody's agreed that with the HTTP standard, we're going to do it a certain way. And because of that, it makes a protocol. And you might have seen, like when you type in websites, right? You type in https://. Sometimes you have the S that just stands for like a secure version of HTTP. It's not super important, but whenever you're doing this, you're actually telling it, hey, I want to go to this server use the hypertext transfer protocol. HTTP interactions take place between a client and a server through something called requests. There's lots of different like flavors of requests, but we mainly care about two of them. The first one is a GET request, which is literally like requesting data from a web server. You show up and say, hey, I want what you have, and they give you back HTML files. And that's all your web browser is doing. Basically, most of the day, it's just sitting there taking GET requests to different servers. So when you load up like HackKU.org, it's sending a GET request to our server and giving back our web page. There's also POST requests, which is how you send data over a web server, how you send data to a web server. So we can get things from them and we can also send things to it. And it's called POST because, you know, like in Britain, you're posting something in the postage system. But with this, we can talk about another interesting HTML element, and that is HTML forms. And a form is basically how we're going to take data from users. So I'm going to take this moment to transition to something else. Let me go to, you can go maybe to check-in. So an HTML form would look something like this. You can ignore a lot of the other stuff. We know what a lot of these tags do already, but with a form, it is made up of labels and inputs. So a label is like literally a piece of excuse me, a label is like literally a piece of text like on the forum input. So like this one will say, it will have a label that says enter your name. And then the input is actually like the box that you'll put stuff in. And I'll come back to this example a little later when we're ready to talk about a couple other things. But then you also have a submit button on the form. And if I load this up, let me move back. Moving a bit more forward. Let's put the website. See again. Yeah, this is where I want to be. Second. Sorry, I forgot what I named this thing. So if I go to here, this is what the form looks like. Now, this is kind of styled and what we're going to get to a bit later, but to save time, because we had technical difficulties, I can't mark up the whole form now, but this is the label, the enter your name. This is the actual form input, and this is the sign in submit button. And if you look on the HTML, we've given it this label, and we give it an ID called name label that will come in handy a bit later. And we have this for, which is name. And whenever we are posting data to a server, it comes as like a key value store. So the stuff that is input on this, so that the for means it's referring to this one that has name. So for name equals name. And this here has the ID name, which means that when it gets sent as the key value pair, whatever is input in this box will be like name equals whatever the user input, which we'll get to that in a minute. And then here you can see we have the submit button. It has the value sign in. Here value is just what's actually in the button. And we have to, of course, give it the type of submit. The type dictates what the form input is. So here it's a submit because it's a submit button. And here it is a text because it's a text input. So if you want to do like with the sign in page, sort of how this might work is you send a GET request to the server that's hosting the sign in page. It will return you back the sign in HTML page. Then you fill out the form, you give it your name, and you post it back to the server, and the server will then do something with that data. Also, you might notice there's this like 200 OK, 200 OK. Whenever you are sending HTTP requests to a server, they will send you back like a response code. So like it just happens to be a number. 200 means like everything is okay. If you ever heard of 404 error, that means you tried to get a page from the server that isn't there, like it can't find it. 403 is forbidden. So if you're trying to do something that you don't have permission to do, you might get returned a 403 error. So do we need to build a web server? That seems really hard. Well, not exactly. There are actually a ton of web servers that already exist that we can use. So like Nginx, Caddy, Apache, Gunicorn. If you ever heard of any of these softwares, these are all web servers that we can use. But we still need to write the code to actually control the web server, to make it do what we want. And to do that, we'll use a web framework. Web frameworks are a special software that handles dealing with the web server. It also has stuff like URL routing, as a template engine, which we'll talk about template engines a little later. But the specific web framework we're going to use is Flask. It's written in Python, so everybody here should be able to use it. But before we do that, we have to get Flask. It's not installed by default. You might have like the random module or the math module, but you can't just import Flask without anything else. So you're going to have to install it using pip, which is Python's package manager. A package manager is simply a tool for managing or upgrading third-party modules or applications. And pip does come built in with Python. So you can, yeah, what's up?
I guess you haven't gotten to it, but does that command work in Windows?
It should. So with Windows, you have, like there's some variation in like how you install Python. you might have to fix some things because it like messes it up with the system path. But you can use pip anywhere. So if we want Flask, I can show you what it looks like to install it. Activate. I gotta list my environments again because I have to switch over to a different one. Conda activate. And then if we want to actually install it, we can do pip install Flask. Just type it there. And it's look at it go. It's trying. It's collecting Flask. It's taking a while. So maybe we can come back. I don't know why it's taking so long. Okay, there we go. So it has to download a bunch of other stuff to install Flask, but if you look, when it's done, it successfully installed a bunch of stuff and Flask 3.0.3. So now we have it and we can use it. So before we get drunk with web programming, there's one piece of new Python syntax that people from 168 and 268 haven't seen that we need to talk about. Just very quickly, we have to talk about decorators. And if you like functional programming, these just implement higher order functions. That didn't mean anything to you. That's okay. No worries. So in terms of decorators, we can go and say, what is a decorator exactly? A decorator, wrong file. A decorator is basically, you can think of it as a function that adds additional functionality to your functions. So I don't want to get in the weeds for like how you build them and stuff, but let's just say one exists here called do it twice that I can import from this twice module. And the way you use the decorator is above a function declaration you want to decorate or add the extra functionality to, you hit them with an @ sign and then the name of the decorator. So here it's a @ do it twice. And you might hear people refer to this sometimes as like the pie operator or something like that, because some people think this looks like an apple pie, which I can kind of see. But if we have this function just called yo and it prints yo, normally if we comment out the decorator, we go to the file, decorator, oh, that's too far back. If we run the file, it just says yo one time. But if we add the decorator that says, hey, do whatever's in the body of this function twice, you'll see it prints it again. And this is important because in Flask, we define the functionality of our website and through functions that return HTML. And decorators are used to specify both the endpoint and the type of request. So the request type being like get or post, like we talked about earlier. So when I talk about endpoint, what do I mean? If we look at a web URL, we have the protocol, the domain name, and then everything that comes after the domain name is the endpoint. So like if you go to this website, you'll be hitting the officer's endpoint of ACM's website. So if we go and look at sort of a small example, we're ready to look at a small example of Flask. So when you're making a Flask app, you should name your file app.py. This is important because of how Flask is built and how it runs stuff. You can name it other things, but then you have to do like extra special stuff to get it to work. So just name it app. So what we do is from the Flask module, we import the Flask class, and then we make an instance of it. This dunder name here, you basically have to give Flask the name of your currently running script. If you do this dunder name, it's just a shortcut to get Flask to behave. So we've made an instance of this Flask object, and this is basically going to define our web server and our interactions. So if we want to have sort of the root of our web page, just going to our domain name and then slash, and we have it return hello Flask, we literally just make a function and we have it return literal HTML we want it to render. So here you can see we have a paragraph tags with hello Flask inside. So if I go to the hello Flask. Oh, and you'll also see that in the decorator here, we use the decorator app.get. That is because we are defining a get request on that endpoint. So when I hit the slash endpoint with a get request, it should return this. So if we do that, we can run our app. Now, normally you would run it saying by, yeah, what's up?
Where is it?
Where is app.get in the decorator? When we do post requests, we'll put it as app.post. So when we do this, normally you run a Python file by calling like Python3 and then the name of your file. But with Flask, what you do is you just say Flask run. And that is because since Flask is a web framework, what it's doing when you do Flask run is it's going and spinning up a web server in the background and then hooking up your files and your like middleware that you've made. It's hooking it up to that server. So there's like more going on than just running a normal Python file. And then it says it's running on this address here. So if we go there and check out, see what's going on, look at that. We have our hello Flask. So in theory, we're just hosting this locally on like my laptop. But if you put this on a computer in a data center that people could publicly access, you would have a publicly accessible web page just like this. And yeah, so that's kind of a basic example of how Flask works. Yeah, what's up?
We not need the like HTML to have the rest of the syntax that we've been.
That's a good point. So the kind of the tricky thing about the browser is the browser is built to be like the most resilient piece of software on the planet. It will try its best to like, if you mess something up, it will do everything in its power to render that web page somehow and guess what it thought you wanted to do. So like you should not do this. This is bad practice, but just for the small example, if you want to be like correct, you should have put all the HTML stuff. But here, the browser is like smart enough to know that we're trying to render a web page, so it kind of throws it in the body. And if we look, if we inspect, you can see the browser actually like inputs this stuff for us. So it like injects it. But once again, this is kind of bad behavior because it doesn't do what you want all the time. So we can do more than just kind of rendering plain HTML. We can actually use HTML templates with Flask, which, as you might have guessed, it's just like regular HTML, but it has placeholders that you can inject dynamic values into. So in theory, and what we're going to do is we have our check-in web page. We can get form data from the user in the form of a post request, take that and get the actual name that they sent us, and then render a web page that has their name on it. We don't have to know their name because we can make a template and then inject the name into that template. It also has stuff like for loops. You can do if statements. It all works with this template engine called Jinja. So to show you how that works, I will go over to this Let's Build a Website. And so when you're making templates in Flask, if you look here on the left, it's got my like directory structure. In your Flask project, at the root of what you're doing, you'll need to have a folder called templates. You don't get to choose this name. Flask just forces you to have a folder called templates to put all your templates in, and that's where it'll look for stuff. So we have like this sign in HTML page. You can see that it's got the HTML stuff, and I'll get rid of this because we didn't talk about this. We'll need that. So what happens is we can make the page. And so we have our header here, this H1. There's some stuff in here that I'll talk about when it becomes relevant, but it's not relevant right now. So we have our header on the web page, and we have a form. So this template doesn't have any placeholders, but it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to have placeholders to be a template. If we look at the signed in web page, that's cool. And let me get rid of the head tag. So here we'll look and we have a header that says you have signed in. And then inside of that, there is some weird stuff going on. There's a header that says who's all here. And then this jump, that's part of the Jinja template that says, hey, assume there exists some array called names and loop through that, calling everything that's in the array name, just like you would in Python, you for name and names. It works here too. And then if we want to actually insert the value that name holds, we can use these double braces to put it there. We could put it within a span block, which you can think of a span block as it's another HTML element, and it just represents like an inline piece of information. It's kind of just like a box. And then you might also see we have some div elements here. These also are just like boxes. So we're imposing like extra structure on the web page by giving it sort of these extra invisible elements. And if we actually go and we launch this Flask app, you can see that if I go and sign in to the workshop, it shows it here. And yeah,
What file were you just in? Was that the template file?
yeah, this is the template file. So you can see that we're somehow like magically feeding in this names array, and it knows that in the names array to put each name on the web page. So I don't know who else wants to Andrew. You can put Andrew on here, and you can see that it dynamically updates the web page. Here, you okay, yes. We can do Zoe. We can do Sungin. But now what is actually happening here? We have the template, but how is Flask doing stuff? How does that work? Well, let's take a look at our app.py. I keep forgetting that I need to save my files. So this is a more complicated Flask app, but we have, of course, just like normal, we have our flask.flask with the name. And then we create, I'm doing bad practice here because I'm lazy and I want to make this somewhat brief, is we're just going to have a global variable called names. And then we're going to make the sign-in endpoint. This is, if we look at our app here, you look at the URL, this is at the root. So here you'll see we have a GET request centered around the root. And then we use this flask.render template signin.html. So when we were just returning HTML encoded strings, this render template function gets the file name. It starts looking at the templates directory like within there, and then you give it the path from the templates directory to whichever template you want to render. And it will go ahead, take that template, and actually turn it into an HTML string that then gets displayed on the web page. So in a more complicated thing, like the signed in page, where we actually have multiple names, what we do is we render the signed in template, but we have to pass an extra parameter because remember, we just sort of assumed in the template that that names array exists, but we have to actually tell like Flask what values to pass to make that array. And for that, we give it our names array here. So we're sort of like, whenever you're accessing variables in your Jinja templates, you have to, when you're rendering them, you have to bind the corresponding values in your function call. Does that like sort of make sense? Okay. What? Yeah, it's exactly like a function. It's exactly a function parameter. And then we have another endpoint here. And this is the thing that actually updates the names. Because if you look at our template here, our sign-in template, on this one with forms, I guess I forgot to mention that you specify two things with attributes in the forms. You give it the action you want it to take. And the action is basically, hey, I'm going to post the data to some place. Where do you want me to like post it to? Because we told it method equals post, so it knows it's going to post the data using post requests. But for the action, we have to actually tell it where to send that. And it works exactly like all the other links in HTML do. You could either give it a universal things like http.kuacm.club or hackku.org, and it will post the data to that server, or we could give it an endpoint locally to us. So we're going to give it update names. And then this update names endpoint we've defined, we notice here we're using app.post, not app.get. So we're taking a post request. Yes. What do you mean by the data? Like the date? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where, like, which app? Where's that saved?
Yeah. So like, so it's going to be saved in the like the input attribute. So I guess like saved is kind of it's not exactly the correct term because all we're doing is like defining the structure of something for the web browser to display. And then in that element, so in the element that is defined by this input type text, this here, the browser, like whatever gets input there, the browser is going to sort of internally store as this name when it posts. So I guess like the name parameter that we're getting in the request is coming from here, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So if we're going to do the update names, we're getting data from a post request. And if we're going to do that, we have to access the request data somehow. And to do that, Flask has, I don't even know how it does this. It's like some like black magic or something happening, but it has a global variable you can access called request from Flask. So you can do like flask.request.form. And then anytime you are like submitting a form, that is going to be a dictionary that has all of your form data in it. So specifically, the keys are going to be what the name, this name equals attribute in your input is. That's going to be the key in the dictionary for the value that corresponds to the data that the user entered here. So in this case, we can access this via flask.request.form and then give it the name key, and that will be the name attribute or like the name input that the user posted to us. And we can access it using this flask.request.form. I put an if statement here because, maybe somebody is just going to try to put a bunch of junk into put a bunch of like junk into the input form that's not a name. Like maybe they want to put like the entire script of the B movie or something like that. If that happens, I just chose an arbitrary number. If the thing they input is longer than a tweet, 280 characters, then we give them a 403 error. If you use this flask.abort and then give it a HTTP code, it will stop whatever it's doing and just return that code to the user. So in this case, if the user tries to give us something way too long, we hit them with a 403 forbidden error. But here, if that doesn't happen, then we go ahead and append whatever name that they gave us into the names array. After that, we are going to, we have another new method, which is flask.redirect, which basically lets us take some redirect the user to another endpoint on our server. And you use this URL for function, also given by Flask, to generate the URL for the endpoint you want to go to. So here we want to take them to the signed in endpoint. And the endpoint name that you're giving here is like the name of the function. So here the function's name is signed in. And then here we have like the signed in string we give it, and we say, hey, generate me the URL that corresponds to this endpoint, and then redirect the user there. So if you kind of look again at the flow of what's happening here, someone else went to Deli. So we put in Deli's name here. What's happening is I hit sign in, the form takes that and posts it to the update names endpoint. It adds Deli's name to the array, and then it redirects me to the signed in page and renders that template. Yeah.
Can you say that exact sentence again?
Yeah. So sorry, my voice is like a bit scratchy today. So what's happening is we put in Deli's name into the form. We're in the root endpoint. It will take that and post that data to the update names endpoint of our server. And then the update names endpoint will verify that Deli's name is short enough and then append it to the global names array. And then after that, it will redirect us to the signed in web page. And there it will render all of the, it will go through and render the template, looping through the list of names and putting each one on the HTML page. So we do this here. That's exactly what happens. Yes. Yeah, I can do that. I actually have a GitHub repo where this is already at, so I can link it to you. You can add it as a sub module or something. So now, so that's sort of the functionality of the web page. That's how it works. But you might have noticed the HTML we made earlier looks very different than this HTML I'm showing you now. It has a fancy duck background. It looks, I don't know, I think it looks pretty nice. But it doesn't do that by default. And there's one more thing we have to talk about. We have to talk about how to make our websites look beautiful, fabulous. How do you actually style a web page? And to do that, you use something called CSS, or cascading style sheets. And the style sheets portion is just a style sheet language defines how structured documents look. It's actually the style of the web page. And then the cascading portion, basically, it's kind of complicated, but it means that style values are combined from multiple sources. And I'll show you what that means here. So you can include a style sheet in your HTML document by, there's an extra tag you have to add before body called head. And then within head, you put an HTML that looks just like this. So we tell it rel equals style sheet, and then we give it a link that directs us to our CSS file. And you can see in our templates, we have it right up here. And since this is a template and Flask is kind of weird, we have to use this special function, the URL for again, because the CSS is not a template, but it's not like we don't have anywhere to put things that are not templates that Flask knows about. It only knows strings and things in the templates folder. So there's this other folder called, that's called static. And within static, you can put, style.css. And this just says, hey, within the static folder, I have this thing called style.css, generate me the URL that goes here. Yes.
Is the static folder there by default?
The static folder is not there by default. You have to manually create it. Nothing, Flask won't make anything for you by default. You have to manually create the template folder. You have to manually create the static folder. So some important things with CSS before we actually see how it works is that every element has this thing called the box model. And there are like 4 important things on each HTML element. There's, of course, the content. Then there's this stuff called padding, which is basically space immediately around the content. After that, there's a border, which is like literally a border drawn around the box. And then after that, there's the margins, which are the space past the border. So you can think of it as sort of like a 4-layer box where you have just the actual content of the element, space around that content, a border that is like drawn, and then the margins around that border. So the other important thing with CSS is this thing called flexbox. Now, we can use a lot of different attributes in CSS to define colors, fonts, stuff like that. But for actually position of the elements, we need something a bit stronger, which is this CSS feature that handles, it automatically handles the layout of a web page. There's sort of 2 main flavors of how Flexbox works. The first one is the column flex, which basically if you have, some like div or something, and in it, that is going to be like a flex box, then everything inside it, it tries to display them as columns next to each other. So like if I had, like a bunch of spans inside of a div, each of these spans it would try to display as a column next to each other. And you have this main axis, which is the align items axis, and that'll make a bit more sense in a minute. And you have the cross axis, which is the justify content. And then, of course, you have row flex, which is what you would think. Instead of trying to display them as columns, it tries to display them as rows. So let's actually do it as opposed to just showing you like pictures and stuff. So I'll go over the style sheet for the sign-in page. It's in the static folder, and it has this style.css. So there's a couple of things. The first thing is you define the style of elements by the actual name of the tag. So here we are defining the style for the HTML tag, and then also the body tag. If you want to style multiple elements together with like common properties, you use a comma to separate them. And you'll see here, we define body again down here. This is where the cascading part comes in. It will combine this styling information and this styling information to fully style the body. So what we're saying is we want the body of the page to take up 100% of the width of the page, 100% of the height of the page. If content overflows from the page, we want it to be hidden, and we want to give it this Monaco font. Once again, just like HTML, there's like thousands of these different properties you can give to elements. And the best way to learn them is just to like look up the properties of the specific element you're trying to do. Otherwise, I'd be here forever just listing stuff off. So like another thing for the body is we want to display it as a flex box because we want, if you look here, everything is centered, right? Everything is centered on the web page. And this is because we go back to the template, sign in, let's do GS. Okay. So here, if you look in the body, we have a div, and within this div, it has a class. You can think of a class as just like, you can think of it as like a label you can put on any number of elements so that you can style them together. So you give it as an attribute, class equals sign in, and then you select, this is called a CSS selector, is if you want to style all elements that have the same class attribute, you use a dot and then the name of the class. So since this has the sign in class, we want to style it with dot sign in. And you're like, okay, well, why would I do this? Why would I not just specifically use like the name of the tag? Well, let's say we want to use the same style sheet on multiple different templates. Here, this also happens to be a div, which has the class sign in, but we have another div here. And we want to style the sign in div differently than this one down here because this is the one that contains all of our names. So we can do that by giving them a class to sort of almost like section out specific groups of elements. So, oops, what have I done? So if we go back to the CSS file, also the other thing is that you can also target a one part, like you can do classes for multiple different elements, or if you want to target one element specifically, you can use what's called an ID, which you can think of it as it's just like a class, but it's unique to that specific element. Nobody else can have that ID. And you can select an element with a specific ID with this with the hash in front. So here what we're doing, it's kind of a complicated selector, but we're doing everything that has the class sign in, everything that has the ID names, and then every form element. And together we are making all of these also flexed, and we're telling them that we want it to flex them as we want to do flex direction column, which means that it's going to display all of these things as, it's kind of backwards, but flex direction column means it's going to display everything as a row. So now we have this like these boxes. So like the sign-in page, we have this div with the sign-in class. And in that, each of these elements, we're telling it, hey, within this div, do a flex box and make each of them a row. So that sort of defines like the positioning. And then we have like maybe some specific things we want to add just to sign in and form. And for that, we want to center all the items and then center them both vertically and horizontally. That's what these two do. So like aligning items centers them all like vertically because we're flexing them as rows. And then the justify content centers them also horizontally. So it's like kind of that 2-axis model I showed earlier on the slides. Like here, you're gonna have you have like a justify content axis and you have align items axis. So we can do that. And then this flex grow here, basically it says that the nice thing about Flexbox is if you're adding things to a Flexbox, it will dynamically resize it as you go. So like, let's say I had a template where I was adding a bunch of spans. I don't, just like in this signed in page, I'm adding a bunch of spans into this this like div that is a Flexbox. And as I'm doing that, I want to define how it's actually going to partition up that empty space. So this flex row 1 just says, hey, like use the same ratio for each element. So make them all evenly share the space. So this is a ratio here, but you could change it to like 0.3 or something to make it so like the first element takes up like way less space than the rest of them. Or I might have that backwards, but you can basically change the ratio in which the space is shared between elements. Now in terms of actually like other styling stuff, if we want to set a background image, we can have our sign-in containers. And if we want to make the duck have their background image, you can use this background image property. And this, you can ignore this linear gradient. It's just how I got like the fancy glaze over the duck, but it's not super important. What's important is this URL. And this is, just like everything else we've seen, it's a link to assets relative to the style sheet that tells it what to display as the background image. So here we say the URL is tealduck.jpg. And if you look in the static folder, there is a file called tealduck.jpg. So it knows that, hey, I can look at this and I'm going to display this as the background image. So the beginning, this linear gradient part, what?
Linear gradient.
Yeah, this basically, like, you can define like layering backgrounds over. So like each time you put a comma in the background image property, you're saying like, hey, make this, like put like it goes from top down. So like put this background on top and then under it, put this background. And this linear gradient just basically draws like a white haze over it. And then we tell it, hey, the size of the background image, I want you to cover the whole web page. So you can kind of keep going with this and do different styling information. You know, you can change the font of different elements. You can change the size of elements. You can change the border size. There's lots of different things we can do, but we're already over time. So I want to wrap up and not keep you guys here too long. But with that, with how we've done the flex boxes to center everything, we now can make our web page ends up looking like this, as opposed to if we didn't have it. I might actually be able to show you what it looks like without the style sheet. Let me open up some. Open up this and then open up. It's like if I take out the style sheet, maybe. Oh, because I opened it. Oops. One second. Oh. I don't really know what I did. But I like if I take away the style sheet from like this first page, and then I reload the Flask server, you can see it totally changes the web page. Like it looks completely different because now none of them are flexed. It's just kind of all over the place. It displays them in sequence in kind of a messy way. But if we put it back and then run it again, it looks much better. So sort of putting that all together, we covered a lot of stuff. This was very much a crash course just to expose you to the different ideas because it's kind of impossible to do an in-depth tutorial on all of this stuff in like an hour and 15 minutes. But I do have one thing. If you go to the website checkin.onlynans, oh fuck, it's not working. No. Oh, here we go. If you go to, I have to rerun the Flask app specifically like this. Okay. If you go to the website checkin.onlynans.org, you guys can actually use the check-in app that we created. If you pull it up on your computers, you can go and check in. Like, if I go check in. Oh no, hang on. I have to hang on. Don't check in yet. I realize something's wrong. 1 second. I know what I did. See, I accidentally deleted the style sheet on the other one. So we try this again. Okay, now go back and check in. And look at that. Everybody's able to check in. Yo, what's up? Well, I've got that for you with my last slide here. So, oh, no, I don't want to leak my passwords. So like, with my last slide, some references since we did go over a lot of stuff. The MVN web docs, they're made by Mozilla. They document all of this stuff really well. So if you're interested in learning more HTML tags, different CSS elements, this is your one-stop shop, as well as W3 Schools. They have a lot of really good resources. In addition, the Flask Quick Start Guide is really good, has lots of different resources on Flask. And of course, thank you for your time. If you go to this URL, I haven't posted them yet, but later tonight I will post hopefully the workshop recording, the slides, the link to the GitHub, everything that has all the code, it will be there. So we can check the check-in page one more time. There's lots of people who checked in. But yeah, awesome. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I hope you enjoyed our whirlwind presentation. That came in surprisingly on time. How do I fix this?